Let's now invite Scott Reid, CTV News political commentator. Hi, Scott. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, Prime Minister Trudeau meeting with President-elect at Mar-a-Lago. We know they spoke on the phone on Monday about tariffs when Trump made the announcement. What do you make of this next step, face-to-face?
I don't think there's any way to interpret this other than positively. I mean, the Prime Minister has been under a lot of pressure since that famous tweet, social media post from Trump to take bold, direct action. And hopping on a plane and being the first G7 leader to sit down eyeball to eyeball with Donald Trump certainly must qualify as bold, direct action. So it's not evidence of a big breakthrough, of a certain breakthrough, but it's extremely encouraging that Trump is willing to give over his Friday evening to Canada, to the Prime Minister, and we'll get a chance to plead our case directly.
Right. We also know, Scott, that Dominic LeBlanc, Public Safety Minister, is accompanying the Prime Minister on this trip. He, of course, is in charge of the border. That speaks to the significance to this matter as well, of the border, especially after critical comments that have come in from Trump's border czar, Tom Homan.
You've got it. It really tips the hand as to what part, at least part of the agenda for this evening's discussion will be. It sure seems as though the Prime Minister wants to reinforce to Trump that we will take action. So start to think about things like export controls so that we have a stronger handle on who's not just coming into Canada, but who's leaving, reassurance about resources that could be dedicated at the border. Those sorts of assurances, those are the kinds of commitments that Canada, frankly, I think in the current context would be happy to make to the incoming president. Far better that we'd be having that kind of discussion than trying to pick and choose and trade off one sector, agriculture versus energy, or auto versus forestry. So I think the Prime Minister is trying to take control of this conversation. He's trying to take control of this negotiation and demonstrate quick, swift action on the part of Canada.
Like you said, Scott, of course, we're looking at this in a positive light. The Prime Minister is trying to take swift action on the situation where we are. But we also know that the Prime Minister, Scott, is in a minority government, is in a weak position when it comes to the Prime Minister's personal popularity as well in this country. How much leverage does he really have, looking at these scenarios, in negotiating when we know that election in Canada could perhaps happen any time?
Well, it's an important question. You know, we've seen the premiers pushing the Prime Minister, talking about perhaps going off on their own, acting independently. But look, the national self-interest lies in a clear, firm negotiating position from the government of Canada. And Justin Trudeau leads the government of Canada. I think the premiers recognize that. I think others recognize that. So while, the state of Parliament may be precarious, while the polls may not be positive for the Prime Minister, this is exactly the correct antidote, what he's doing tonight.
Right.
Relying on his personal relationship that was established with Trump, taking action, being the first G7 leader to sit down with him and saying, all right, let's move this conversation forward. What else would you have him do? What else could he possibly do? Yeah. I think it's very encouraging to note, by the way, that Trump is willing to sit down with him. He's got 50 nights between now and his inauguration. The fact that he's willing to reserve one of them for Trudeau, whom the naysayers said, couldn't get Trump's time. I think that's significant.
Yeah, it also shows that Trump also knows how significant this relationship is between the U.S. and Canada. But talking about relationships, Scott, their own relationship, personal relationship between Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau, we know it's been a tough one over the years with the comments that have been flying back and forth. How much of that do you think can factor into all of this, if at all?
Well, traditionally, it's always been important, especially with something like this, when you end up with what we in politics call a bilateral. Bilateral meaning a one-on-one meeting between the two heads of government. And certainly in the case of Trump, you would think it's important, but we've also seen how mercurial Trump is. I mean, look at the way that he's thrown friends overboard and the way that he's then welcomed people who were once bitterly opposed to him on board. I mean, Marco Rubio, who criticized him viciously, hard, and publicly, is now his Secretary of State, right. Whereas his former vice president was, almost had a mob unleashed on him. So I wouldn't put too much on the personal relationship. Ultimately, Trump is going to be guided by what he thinks is good for Trump. And if Trudeau can come and appeal to that, my guess is you're going to achieve progress.
All right. We leave it at that for tonight. Scott Reid, CTV News political commentator. Thank you for this, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you.